The rain lashed against the windowpane like tiny fists of fury, each drop a reminder of the storm raging within him. The dim glow of a flickering street lamp barely illuminated the cramped, lifeless room where Arif sat, his silhouette hunched over an old wooden desk. The musty air carried the scent of forgotten dreams, of unopened books and dust-coated ambitions. His trembling fingers traced the edges of a crumpled letter, one he had read 1,000 times before, yet never truly let go of. The ink had faded over the years, but the words were etched deep into his soul. It was a letter from a time when hope still lived in his heart, when he believed in the promise of a future filled with light. Arif, I believe in you. No matter where life takes you, remember that you have a purpose. He let out a bitter chuckle. Purpose. If only she knew how far I've fallen. The voice in his head was relentless, a cruel whisper that reminded him of every failure, every broken dream, every door that had been slammed shut in his face. You are nothing. You will never rise again. You have wasted every chance life gave you. The words clawed at him, sinking deeper than any wound ever could. His once promising business had collapsed, drowning him in debt. The love of his life had walked away, unable to endure his spiral into darkness. His friends had drifted away, tired of his self-inflicted exile. He had become a shadow, a ghost of the man he once was. The thunder outside cracked like the sky itself was breaking apart. A gust of wind forced the fragile window open, sending a cold shiver through the room. Papers scattered across the desk, but only one mattered, the letter. Arif clenched it in his fist. He had spent years running, hiding from his own reflection, drowning himself in regret. Every day was a loop of meaningless existence. Wake up, breathe, exist, repeat. But tonight felt different. The storm outside felt personal, as if the universe was demanding a response from him, as if it was challenging him to fight back. A sudden, overwhelming weight crushed his chest, and before he could stop himself, his hands trembled, his body curled forward, and a silent cry escaped his lips, a cry that had been trapped for too long. He wasn't even sure who he was crying to. The walls, the darkness, or something greater. For years, he had scoffed at the idea of faith. He had mocked those who believed in something beyond logic and reason. But what had logic given him? Where had his pride led him? For the first time in years, Arif let his walls crack. His voice, hoarse and broken, barely formed the words, but they slipped out anyway, a whisper in the storm. If anyone is listening. He exhaled sharply, his throat tight with emotion. I can't do this anymore. His fingers dug into the desk, knuckles turning white. I need help. I don't know if I deserve it. I don't even know if I believe in it. But if there's someone. The words choked him, but he forced them out. Give me a sign. Please. A heavy silence filled the room. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, listening. For a moment nothing happened. No grand miracle. No divine answer. Just silence. Arif laughed bitterly. Course. What did I expect? He wiped at his damp face and shook his head. Maybe he was truly alone after all. And then, a single ray of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the room for a split second. And in that instant, his eyes fell on something he hadn't noticed before. The letter, but not the one in his hands. It was tucked beneath a pile of forgotten papers, barely visible, yet something pulled at him to pick it up. Heart pounding, Arif reached for it, his fingers brushing against the fragile paper. The moment he unfolded it, his breath caught. The handwriting, it was his own. A message, scribbled in desperation years ago, when he still had hope, when he still believed in himself. No matter what happens, Arif, don't give up on yourself. You were meant for more than this. His hands trembled as he read the words over and over. His past self reaching out to him through time. Was this the sign he had asked for? Or had it been there all along, waiting for him to finally see it? Arif let out a shaky breath, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't sure what this meant or where this would lead. But for the first time in years, a tiny ember stirred within him, a flicker of something he thought had died. Hope. And hope, even in its smallest form, was enough to begin again. Arif used to believe he was unstoppable. Not too long ago, he stood at the peak of his dreams, the young entrepreneur with sharp instincts, an undeniable charm, and a vision that could change the game. He had built something out of nothing, a business that people admired, a career that promised limitless success. He was the kind of man others wanted to become, confident, fearless, ambitious. And he had her, Mira, the woman who saw through his bravado, the only person who truly understood him. She had been there when he was nothing, standing beside him as he built his empire from scratch. She had been his calm in the chaos, his reminder that life was more than just success. But pride is a strange thing. It blinds you, whispers lies in your ear, makes you believe you don't need anyone's help. And Arif had believed the lies. The rise before the storm. There was a time when every morning greeted him with endless possibilities. Meetings in high-rise buildings, phone calls that determined the fate of companies, and the rush of watching his bank account grow beyond anything he ever imagined. Investors sought his attention. Competitors envied him. Employees followed his every word. But arrogance is a slow poison. The warnings had come early. Mira's concerned voice, his mentor's cautious advice, his closest friend's hesitation. You're moving too fast, Arif. You're taking risks that might backfire. You need to slow down, think long-term. You're shutting people out. We're worried about you. He had laughed, shrugged it off. What did they know? They weren't built for this. They didn't understand his vision. So he ignored them. And then the cracks began to show. The mistakes that cost everything. Started with one bad investment. A shortcut, a gamble, one that promised quick returns but carried hidden dangers. Then another. Then another. Before he knew it, he had poured everything he had into the wrong hands, chasing a dream that had already turned to dust. The emails became colder. The calls became fewer. Investors backed out. Contracts fell apart. And one day the numbers stopped making sense. The moment he realized it was all crumbling, it was already too late. His empire, the very thing that defined him, collapsed overnight. The banks closed in. Debts piled up. His employees, the ones who once looked up to him with admiration, now stared at him with resentment and fear. And just like that, Arif was no longer a king, just a man drowning in his own recklessness. The love that walked away. Through it all, Mira stood by him, even when he didn't deserve it. She held his hand when the court issued its final notice. She stayed awake through nights of panic and rage, whispering that money wasn't everything, that they could start again. But Arif wasn't listening. His pride had been shattered, his ego bleeding, and instead of leaning on the only person who had ever truly loved him, he pushed her away. I don't need your pity, Mira. Oh, leave like everyone else. I'll fix this. I don't need anyone. He had spat the words like venom, even as a part of him begged her to stay. Mira didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with something that scared him more than anger, disappointment. And then she left. He told himself she'd come back. She never did. The loneliness that followed. After Mira was gone, everything lost its meaning. His apartment, once filled with life, became nothing more than a prison of regrets. The couch still carried her scent. The dining table still had 2 chairs, though only one was ever used now. His phone stopped ringing. No more invitations. No more check-ins from friends. People drifted away, as if his failure was contagious. And maybe they weren't wrong. Because who was he now? Arif, the business prodigy. Arif, the confident leader. Arif, the man who had it all. All that remained was a shadow of himself, a man consumed by self-pity, bitterness, and endless, suffocating regret. The cycle of despair. He tried to rebuild. He did. But the world doesn't wait for those who fall. Doors that once opened with a smile now remained shut. Calls that were once returned within minutes now went ignored. He became a ghost in his own city, walking through streets where his name used to matter. Days blurred into nights, and nights into a void of nothingness. He stopped trying. What was the point? The world had moved on. No one believed in him anymore. And worst of all, he didn't believe in himself. The final blow. One night, he stared at himself in the mirror. What looked back wasn't Arif the leader, Arif the dreamer, or Arif the man Mira loved. What looked back was a failure, a broken thing, something unworthy of a second chance. He had spent years building an empire, and only a few moments destroying it all. How pathetic. The storm outside raged, as if mocking him. The walls of his empty apartment felt smaller, pressing against him, suffocating him. He grabbed a bottle, poured himself another drink, but even alcohol couldn't drown the voice in his head anymore. You are nothing. You will never rise again. You have wasted every chance life gave you. Maybe it was true. Maybe he was beyond saving. Maybe this was all there was left. And yet, something inside him, a whisper, a tiny ember, buried under the ashes of his past, refused to die. Something still clung to the idea that this wasn't the end. That maybe, just maybe, there was still a way back. But the question was, did he have the strength to find it? The evening air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth after an afternoon rain. The city, always loud, always moving, seemed quieter tonight. Or maybe it was just Ariv, detached from everything, lost in his own emptiness. He walked with no real destination, hands buried deep in his worn-out jacket. The park was nearly deserted, the streetlights casting long, ghostly shadows. He wasn't sure why he came here. Maybe because this place used to mean something. Before everything fell apart. As he turned a corner, his tired eyes landed on a lone figure sitting on a bench. An old man, dressed in a simple beige shawl, tossing breadcrumbs to a group of pigeons. There was something strange about him. Something out of place, as if time had forgotten him. Ariv might have walked past, uninterested, had the old man not spoken first. You still have time. Ariv froze. The words cut through the fog in his mind. The man's voice was calm, steady, yet unshakably certain. The old man turned, his piercing eyes locking onto Ariv's. There was no pity in them, no judgment. Only a deep, unsettling knowing. You are not as broken as you think. Ariv felt his pulse quicken. Do I know you? He asked cautiously. The man simply smiled, a quiet, almost amused expression. Oh, but I know you. Ariv tensed. Listen, I'm not in the mood for. Sit, the old man interrupted, patting the empty space beside him. I won't keep you long. Against his better judgment, Ariv found himself lowering onto the bench. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rustling of leaves and the occasional flap of wings as the pigeons took flight. Finally Ariv sighed. What do you want? The old man studied him. The real question is, what do you want? Ariv laughed bitterly. That's easy. I want my life back. The old man nodded as if he expected that answer. And what are you willing to do for it? Ariv frowned. What do you mean? The man leaned forward slightly. Are you willing to let go of the weight you carry? The guilt. The anger. The past. Ariv's jaw clenched. I can't just let go, he muttered. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. The old man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn-out book. The cover was dark leather, faded from years of handling. What's that? Ariv asked, eyeing it suspiciously. A gift, the man said simply. A book of answers. Ariv scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? The old man smiled. You'll see. Read it when you're ready. Ariv took the book reluctantly, running his fingers over the rough edges. Something about it felt ancient, like it had survived generations. Why give this to me? He asked. The man met his gaze. Because you asked for a sign. Ariv stiffened. His mind flashed back to that night. The storm, the desperate prayer whispered into the darkness. I never. Yes, you did, the old man interrupted softly. Even when you weren't sure anyone was listening. Ariv felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. He gripped the book tighter, suddenly desperate to leave. This was too much. He stood abruptly. I should go. The old man simply nodded. You always run when the truth gets too close. Ariv hesitated but forced himself to walk away. His heart was pounding, but he refused to look back. He didn't stop until he was home. The words that felt like they were written for him. Ariv sat on his bed, the small book resting in his hands. The room was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock, a sound he had grown used to ignoring. He stared at the cover. There was no title, no author's name. Just a simple golden emblem that looked almost like an eye. With a deep breath, he flipped it open. The first page held no introduction, no preface. Just a single sentence. To the one who has lost their way. You are not alone. Ariv swallowed hard. He turned the page. You are not beyond saving. Your mistakes do not define you. What you lost is not greater than what still remains. His breath caught. He turned another page and then another. The words spoke directly to him, as if someone had pulled them from his very thoughts. You were never meant to carry this burden alone. Arif clenched his jaw, a sudden tightness forming in his chest. Your past is not a sentence. It is a lesson. A lump rose in his throat. Forgiveness is not about them. It is about freeing yourself. He slammed the book shut. His hands were shaking. How could a book, one he had never seen before, know him so well? His mind raced back to the old man. To the way he looked at him, as if he had seen into his very soul. Because you asked for a sign. Arif exhaled shakily, rubbing his face. Coincidence. That's all this was. Just some old book with generic wisdom that happened to feel personal. That's what he told himself. But deep inside he wasn't so sure. For the first time in a long time, something stirred within him, a question he was too afraid to ask. What if there's still hope? Arif let out a slow breath, staring at the book in his hands. He wasn't ready to believe yet, but for the first time in years, he was ready to try. Arif sat in the dim glow of his apartment, staring at the book on the table. 3 days had passed since he met the old man, and yet, he hadn't been able to forget him, or the words in that book. You are not beyond saving. He wanted to believe it, but how could he? Everywhere he looked, his failures stared back at him. The piles of unpaid bills collecting dust on the kitchen counter. The empty spaces where once there were framed photographs, memories of a life that no longer existed. The cracks in the mirror, reflecting a man he no longer recognized. And worst of all, the silence. Not long ago, his phone never stopped ringing. Clients, investors, journalists. Everyone wanted a piece of Arif Mehta. Now, nothing. Not a single call. Not a single message. No one needed him anymore. He clenched his fists, an all too familiar rage bubbling inside him. Why did the past still haunt him? Why did he still see Mira's face in his dreams? Hear her voice whispering, "You're more than this, Arif." He needed a distraction. Something, anything, to silence the noise in his head. Arif grabbed his phone and scrolled mindlessly. Social media, news, videos, quick escape. It worked for a while, until he saw it. A headline. His name. Once rising entrepreneur falls from grace. Arif Mehta's collapse from success to ruin. His stomach dropped. It was an article, a cruel, merciless autopsy of his downfall. His failures laid bare. His mistakes dissected. His losses turned into entertainment. He forced himself to close the app, but the damage was done. The memories came crashing back. The boardroom, where he once commanded respect, now filled with whispers of doubt. The meeting where investors walked away, leaving him with nothing. The day Mira left, her tear-filled eyes the last thing he saw before the door closed forever. The pain was too much. He needed to get out. 2. Running won't save you, 600 words. The night air was cold as Arif wandered through the city. His feet carried him without purpose. His mind a battlefield. He wasn't looking for answers. He was looking to forget. That's when he saw him, the old man, sitting on the same park bench as before, feeding the pigeons. As if he had been waiting. Arif froze. For a moment he considered turning back, pretending not to see him. But the old man spoke. You still think you can outrun it? Arif's jaw tightened. Outrun what? The man threw another handful of breadcrumbs. The weight you carry. Arif scoffed. What do you know about my weight? The old man looked at him, eyes filled with something Arif couldn't name. I know that no matter how far you walk, it follows. Arif clenched his fists. Why did this stranger's words always cut so deep? You don't know me, he muttered. I know pain when I see it, the man replied. And I know what happens when you bury it instead of facing it. Arif looked away, staring at the pavement. I'm trying. No, you're running, the man corrected. Drowning in distractions. But the truth is still there. Waiting. Arif swallowed hard. The old man's words burned because they were true. What do you want me to do? Arif whispered. The man smiled gently. Write it down. Arif frowned. Write what? Your pain. Your mistakes. Every wound you've been carrying. Arif shook his head. That's ridiculous. Is it? The old man studied him. Or are you afraid of what you'll find when you finally look inside? Arif said nothing. The old man stood up, dusting off his coat. Go home, he said. Face it. And when you're ready, forgive the man in the mirror. And with that he walked away, leaving Arif standing in the cold. His mind screamed at him to ignore the man, to brush off his words. But deep down he knew the truth. The time for running was over. It was time to face the pain. Arif sat at his desk, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of him. A pen rested in his hand, but he couldn't bring himself to write. The old man's words echoed in his head. Face it. And when you're ready, forgive the man in the mirror. Forgive himself. How could he? His past was a graveyard of failures. Broken promises, shattered dreams, relationships burned to the ground. He clenched the pen, his knuckles white. The voices inside him whispered their familiar poison. You think writing a few words will fix everything. You don't deserve forgiveness. You are nothing. You will always be nothing. Arif squeezed his eyes shut. Oh, not this time. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he pressed the pen to paper. And then he wrote, Arif, hate you. I hate what you did. I hate how you let pride destroy everything. I hate how you pushed away the people who loved you. How you let your business, your dreams, and your relationships slip through your fingers. You ruined everything. But I also understand you. You were scared. You were broken before you even knew it. And instead of asking for help, you pretended to be invincible. You lied to yourself, thinking success could fill the emptiness inside you. Couldn't. And now here you are. The bottom. No one to impress. No one left to deceive. So what now? Do you keep hating yourself? Keep running? Or do you get up? Maybe you're not beyond saving. Maybe the old man was right. Maybe your past is not a life sentence. Maybe it's time to start again. Arif, ***. As he finished, Arif felt his chest tighten. His hands trembled, but not from anger. From release. For the first time he had written the truth. And he wasn't running from it. He folded the letter and set it aside. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to take the first step. 2 small steps toward redemption. 600 words. The next morning, Arif hesitated before dialing a number he had been too ashamed to call for months. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello. Arif swallowed hard. Jay, it's me. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. Arif. Yeah, was. Then in a colder tone. What do you want? Arif closed his eyes. He deserved that. I wanted to say I'm sorry. A bitter laugh. For what? Vanishing. Ignoring my calls. Acting like you were better than everyone. Arif's throat tightened. For all of it. Another silence. Then softer, you really mean that? Yes, Jay sighed. It's been a long time, man. I know. I'm not saying everything's fine. But maybe we can talk. Arif felt something in his chest. Something he thought was dead. Oh. The next step was applying for jobs. It was humiliating. Going from being his own boss to sending out resumes like a desperate graduate. And the rejections. Brutal. We regret to inform you. We're looking for someone with more recent experience. Thank you for applying, but each email felt like a punch to his gut. But he didn't stop. He sent another. And another. And another. Because he had made a promise. To himself. Try. Then came the hardest part, rebuilding relationships. He tried calling Mira. She didn't pick up. He tried again. And again. On the 5th call she finally answered. Arif. Just hearing her voice hit him like a wave. He took a breath. I don't expect anything. I needed to say I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Then, it took you a long time to say that. I know. I don't know if things can go back. Arif swallowed. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted you to know. Silence. Then a softer voice. I hope you find what you're looking for, Arif. The call ended. And strangely, he didn't feel broken. Because for the first time in a long time, he had faced the pain instead of running. 3. The final lesson. A week later, Arif sat on the same park bench. This time he was waiting for the old man. And just like before, the old man appeared. Arif smiled slightly. You always show up when I need you, huh? The man chuckled. Or maybe you're finally seeing what's been in front of you all along. Arif hesitated. I tried to fix things. Some worked. Some didn't. The old man nodded. That's life. I don't know if I'll ever be the same again. You won't. The man's eyes were gentle. But maybe that's a good thing. Arif exhaled. Some people still don't believe I've changed. Does that matter? Arif blinked. What? The old man tilted his head. Do you need them to believe? Or do you just need to know it yourself? Arif looked down. The truth was painfully simple. His entire life he had lived for others. For their approval. Their validation. But self-worth doesn't come from the outside. Comes from within. He met the old man's gaze. My past. It's still there. Yes, the old man said. But your past is a teacher, not a life sentence. Arif let the words sink in. For the first time in his life, he believed them. For the first time in years, Arif felt hope. It wasn't overwhelming or loud. It wasn't the arrogant confidence he once carried. It was quiet, subtle, a flicker instead of a flame. But it was real. After weeks of reaching out, sending applications, and trying to mend relationships, things were slowly improving. Jay had agreed to meet for coffee. He had finally gotten a call back for an interview. And though Mira hadn't said much, she had answered his call. It wasn't much, but it was something. And then life struck again. The rejection email hit him like a punch to the gut. Dear Mr. Mehta, we appreciate your interest, but we have decided to move forward with other candidates. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Arif stared at the words, his hands clenching the edge of his desk. He had prepared for this. He had told himself not every attempt would succeed. But knowing something and feeling it were two different things. The doubts crept back in immediately. You really thought they'd hire you? You're still the same failure. You're fooling yourself if you think you can start over. He tried to shake it off. Then came the next blow. Jay cancelled their meeting at the last minute. Sorry man. Something came up. Maybe another time. Maybe another time. Arif's stomach twisted. He could hear the hesitation in Jay's voice. People still didn't trust him. And why should they? He had burned bridges. He had disappointed them. His grip tightened around his phone. A familiar anger rose in his chest. What was the point? Why keep trying if life was just going to knock him down again? He wanted to disappear, to drown in his own self-pity like he had before. But before he could spiral any further, he heard a voice in his mind. Not the cruel voice of his doubts. The old man's voice. Pain is proof that you are still alive. Keep walking. Arif let out a shaky breath. Keep walking. Wasn't that what he had promised himself? To try. He closed his eyes, pressing his fingers against his temples. Oh, not this time. He had spent years running away. Now he was going to fight. Arif grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. He didn't know where he was going. All he knew was he needed answers. His feet led him to the park. And there, as expected, was the old man, sitting on the same bench, feeding the birds. Arif approached, his heart pounding. How do you always know when I need you? The old man smiled. I don't. But the universe has a way of guiding lost souls where they need to be. Arif sat down heavily. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't get it. I was trying. I was doing everything right. And then, it all just fell apart again. The old man nodded. And yet, here you are. Arif frowned. What do you mean? You're still fighting. The man looked at him. That's the difference. Arif let out a bitter laugh. It doesn't feel like I'm winning. The old man chuckled. Who said faith is about winning? Arif fell silent. The man tossed another breadcrumb to the pigeons. You still don't understand, do you? Arif shook his head. Understand what? The old man turned toward him. His eyes were kind but firm. Faith is not about never falling, Arif. It's about getting back up. The words hit something deep inside him. 'Cause he had fallen. Over and over again. But he was still here. Still fighting. The old man continued. People think faith is about certainty. It's not. It's about walking forward. Even when you're afraid. Even when everything tells you to give up. Arif clenched his jaw. But what if I fail again? The man smiled. Then you rise again. Arif looked down at his hands. The rejection, the doubts, the setbacks, they still hurt. But they weren't chains. Not anymore. He exhaled slowly. I don't want to be afraid anymore. The old man nodded. Then stop running from life. Take control of it. Arif stared at him. Take control. Not wait for things to change. Not hope someone would fix it for him. To control. A new thought entered his mind. One he hadn't considered before. He had been waiting for doors to open. What if he built his own? His mind raced. He had skills, knowledge, experience. He had lost everything, but that didn't mean he couldn't start from scratch. He didn't need permission. He didn't need validation. He just needed to begin. His pulse quickened. This was it. His turning point. He stood up. The old man smiled knowingly. Where are you going? Arif took a breath. To build something new. The old man's eyes gleamed. Good. Arif took one last look at the park before walking away. This time he wasn't running from something. He was walking toward something new. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid. Arif had spent most of his life chained to his past, a prisoner of his own regrets. But now he was ready to be free. He stood on the rooftop of his small apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city in hues of gold and crimson. There was something different about today. The air felt lighter. The sky looked brighter. And for the first time in years, his chest didn't feel like it was carrying the weight of 1,000 mistakes. Arif pulled out the letter he had written to himself days ago, the one where he had spilled out every ounce of pain, guilt, and self-hatred. He held it for a moment, feeling the paper between his fingers. Then, with a deep breath, he set it on fire. The flames devoured the words, turning them to ash, just as he had decided to let go of the past that had defined him for too long. As the last embers faded into the wind, Arif whispered, "I forgive you." Not to anyone else. To himself. Too. Becoming the light for others. 600 words. Once, Arif had believed that his life was over. That he had nothing left to offer. But as he walked through the city now, he saw something he had never noticed before. People like him. Men sitting alone on park benches, staring into the distance as if searching for something they had lost. Women walking with their heads low, carrying burdens too heavy to share. Young dreamers, defeated before they even had a chance to begin. Arif knew their pain. And for the first time he realized he could help. Started small. Conversation here. Shared coffee there. He met a young boy sitting outside a bookstore, sketching quietly. The boy told him he wanted to be an artist but didn't think he was good enough. Arif smiled. Neither did I. He met a woman struggling with self-doubt, afraid to take risks. You don't need to have it all figured out, Arif told her. You just need to take the first step. He spoke to strangers who carried stories like his. Stories of loss, regret, and hopelessness. And he shared his own. He told them how he fell, how he lost everything, how he almost gave up. And then how he found his way back. Some listened, some didn't. But it didn't matter. Because for the first time, Arif wasn't looking for validation. He was giving hope. And in doing so, he found his own purpose again. One afternoon Arif received a call. A man introduced himself as Vikram Sethi, the head of a startup mentoring program. I came across one of your articles online, Vikram said. The one where you talked about rebuilding your life after failure. Arif frowned. You read that? I did, Vikram said. And I think you'd be perfect for something we're working on. It turned out that Vikram's organization helped young entrepreneurs, guiding them, teaching them how to navigate failure, how to rise again. Exactly what Arif had needed years ago. And now they wanted him to be a mentor. Arif's heart pounded. He had spent so long thinking he had nothing left to offer. And yet here he was, given an opportunity not to rebuild his past, but to shape someone else's future. It wasn't what he had planned, but it was exactly what he needed. With a deep breath he smiled. I'd love to be a part of this. One evening Arif walked back to the park, the place where it all started, where he had met the old man who had changed his life. But today the bench was empty. No old man, no pigeons, just silence. Arif's heart sank. He had so many things he wanted to tell him. How he had changed. How he had finally found his way. And then, his eyes caught something on the bench. Small, familiar-looking book. Arif picked it up, his fingers tracing its worn-out leather cover. It was the same book the old man had given him. But this time there was something new. A note in the margins, written in an elegant, steady hand. You were never alone. The light was always within you. Arif let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He looked up at the sky, where the stars were beginning to shine. And for the first time in his life, He believed it. He had spent years searching for someone to save him. But in the end, the answer was always there. Inside him. He smiled, closing the book. And then, with steady steps, he walked away, toward the life he was finally ready to live. Arif sat at his desk, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of him. Felt strange. Months ago, he had struggled to even pick up a pen, drowning in self-hatred and regret. But now the words came naturally. He took a deep breath, placed the tip of the pen on the paper, and began to write. To the one who needs to hear this. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you've lost, what you've suffered, or how long you've been carrying the weight of your past. But I do know this. You are not beyond saving. I used to think I was. I thought my mistakes defined me, that the people I hurt would never forgive me, that the life I destroyed could never be rebuilt. I let my failures consume me. I drowned in them. Until one day, someone reminded me that pain is proof that you are still alive. And if you are alive, you still have a chance. Chance to change. Chance to heal. A chance to become something more than the worst thing you've ever done. I know it feels impossible. I know that voice in your head tells you it's too late, that you don't deserve another chance. But that voice is a liar. You are more than your past. Your mistakes do not define you, what you do next does. So don't give up. Not yet. Keep walking. Keep trying. Keep believing that there is more waiting for you beyond this darkness. 'Cause I promise you, there is. And when you find your light again, when you finally step out of this storm, I hope you do what I am doing now. I hope you leave this letter for someone else to find. Because there will always be someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. With hope. Arif. Arif folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of his past lift from his shoulders. He knew exactly where to leave it. He grabbed his jacket, stepped outside, and walked toward the park, toward the bench where everything changed. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers as Arif walked into the park. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Months ago, he had sat here, drowning in regret, convinced that his life was over. Now he saw everything differently. The world hadn't changed. He had. He reached the old bench, his heart pounding. He ran his fingers over the worn wood, smiling to himself. Then, slowly, he took out the letter and placed it neatly on the bench, just as the old man had once left a book for him. He stepped back and watched as a soft breeze lifted the corner of the page. It was out of his hands now. Someone else would find it. Someone else would read it. And maybe, just maybe, it would save them the way he had been saved. He turned to leave, but before he did, his eyes lifted to the sky. For so long, he had looked up and seen only storm clouds. But today, the sky was clear. No more storms. No more darkness. Just light. And for the first time in his life, Arif wasn't afraid of whatever came next. He walked forward, not looking back, because for the first time in years, he had a future worth living for.